Lesson 3 is going to be on subtracting integers. So today we're going to look at how do you deal with positive negatives when you're using the operation of subtraction. So let's get started. The platform on a diving board is 3 meters high. The actions of a diver climbing up the diving board platform and diving 1 meter below the water's surface are shown on the number line at the right. The diver's actions can be represented by the subtraction equation 3 minus 4 equals -1. Rule number 1, write a related addition sentence for the subtraction sentence. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got here. All right, so we can see the water level is at 0. We can see that our individual climbs 3 meters up to the platform, jumps off the platform, goes down 4 meters because they splash at the water level at 0 and go 1 meter below it. So to write an addition sentence that would represent this situation, we would say they go up 3 with a positive 3 integer. All right, they then drop down 4 meters, which we can represent by -4. So you're combining 3 and the -4, and that tells you that they ultimately end up 1 meter below the surface of the water, or at -1. So that kind of represents that whole situation there. All right. Number 2 says use a number line to find 1 minus 5, and then write a related addition sentence for the subtraction sentence. So if we're going to do 1 and we're going to take away 5, let's take a look at what that would look at. So we start at 0. We always start at 0, and we're going to go 1 unit, 1 positive unit. So we're going to go 1 to the right. So we go over here to 1. All right, so now we're at 1, and then we want to take 5 units away. If we take 5 units away, well, then we're going to go to the left. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units to the left, and that finds me right here at -4. So I find the difference between 1 and -5 is -4. And we want to write an addition sentence that represents this. Well, let's do, instead of subtraction, so we have our 1 that we started with, and we want to add something to it that's going to get me down to -4. Well, what would I add to 1 to get to -4? Well, I would add -5 to 1 to get to -4. So I would end up with an addition sentence that looks just like that. Subtracting integers. Okay, so when we subtract an integer, there's a really important idea. What we are really doing is we add its additive inverse. Okay, so remember what additive inverses are. They are another fancy way of saying opposites. So if you have 5, the additive inverse of 5 would be -5. They are numbers that are the same distance from 0 on the number line, or they are numbers that have the same absolute value. So when you are subtracting, what you are really doing is adding the opposite of that integer. So look at the symbols here. If we have p minus q, that's the same as p plus -q. We're really, instead of subtracting q, we're adding its opposite, or its additive inverse, which is -q. So this is kind of where this weird phenomenon comes in, that all this time you thought you were subtracting, you really weren't. All right, there is no subtraction. It's really just adding the additive inverse. So look at the example down here. 4 minus 9 is really 4 plus -9. All right, subtracting 9 is the same as adding -9. And in either case, you get an answer of -5. All right, same idea on the next example. 7 minus -10. Change subtraction to an addition symbol, and then we do the additive inverse of -10, which is +10. Either case gives you an answer of 17. So when you subtract 7, the result is the same as adding its additive inverse. So as we see here, 6 minus 7 is -1. Well, instead of subtracting, we add. Instead of subtracting +7, we add -7. And that still gives us a result of -1. You can see this on this number line below as well. We add +7 integers. All right. When we move to the left, -7, we can think of that as taking 7 away, or we can think of that as adding -7 negatives. Either way, it gets us to that same result of -1. So let's look at some examples as to how this whole process works. All right, so we've got 8 minus 13. All right, so first thing, let's turn this into an addition problem because addition is easier than subtraction. So instead of 8 minus positive 13, what we really have is 8 plus negative 13. We have 8 plus negative 13. All right, well, when we add integers with different signs, we look at which one has the larger absolute value. Negative 13 has a larger absolute value. So that means my answer will be negative. And then I can simply take the difference of my absolute value. So I can do 13 minus 8, and that equals 5. And then I just plug that back up into there where I said my answer would be negative, and I get negative 5. So 8 minus 13 is negative 5, for the same reason that 8 plus negative 13 is negative 5. So let's look at negative 10 minus 7. Again, let's turn this into an addition problem. Negative 10 changed subtraction to addition, and we flip the sign of my integer. Negative 10 plus negative 7. Well, two negatives added together are negative. And I take the absolute values and add them together, so 10 plus 7 is 17. So I end up with an answer of negative 17. There you go. All right. So what happens if I subtract a negative number? Well, it's the exact same thing. All right. It's still this notion that I'm going to add the additive inverse. So if I have 1 minus negative 2, I'm going to change this to 1 plus the additive inverse. The additive inverse of negative 2 is 2. So 1 plus 2 is 3. So a way people think about this is if you have 1 minus negative 2, you're kind of taking these two negative symbols and combining them into an addition sign. So subtracting a negative is the same as adding, its positive inverse. Okay, one more here. Find negative 10 minus negative 7. Negative 10, add, instead of subtract, it's additive inverse. The opposite of negative 7 is 7. So that gives me negative 10 plus 7. So if I have 10 negatives and 7 positives, well, those 7 positives cancel out 7 of the negatives, leaving me with 3 negatives. So I end up with a final answer of negative 3. All right, we're going to do a little substitution here in these next examples. So what if we have variables instead of actual numbers? Well, as long as they give us values for these variables, it's really nothing new. All we do is substitute in our values. So if we have x minus y, and we know that x is equal to negative 6. So that means I'm going to replace x with negative 6. All right, and then y is equal to negative 5. So I'm doing x minus y. So I already substituted in negative 6 for x, and I'm subtracting negative 5 in for y. Now, why do I put the parentheses? Because a negative minus a negative looks kind of funky. So I kind of want to change that. All right. So let's turn that into an addition problem. Make it nice and easy for ourselves. So negative 6 stays the same. We change subtraction to addition, and we change our second term to its additive inverse of 5. So negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1. So let's do the exact same thing for number 6. For number 6, we have m minus n, all right, and we know that m's value is negative 15. So I have negative 15, then I'm subtracting the value for n, which is 8, so that n becomes 8. So I have negative 15 minus 8. Well, let's change that into an addition problem. Negative 15 plus the additive inverse, which is negative 8. So that gives me negative 15 plus negative 8. And negative 15 plus negative 8 is negative 23. Okay, let's do a real world example. All right, it says the temperatures on the moon vary, which is a fancy word for saying change, from negative 173 degrees Celsius to 127 degrees Celsius. That's quite a change. We're going to find the difference between the maximum and minimum temperatures. So it says subtract the lower temperature from the higher temperatures. That means we want to start with the higher temperature. The warmer temperature in this case is 127 degrees. And we want to subtract that we want to subtract the lower temperature from it. So our lower temperature is negative 173 degrees. So we have a subtraction problem of 127 minus negative 173. So let's turn that into an addition problem to make our lives easier. So we change subtraction to addition, and we change our negative 173 to its additive inverse of 173. Oops, not 170, 117, 173. These are degrees. So that simply leaves us with a nice easy problem of 127 plus 173, which gives us a total of 300 degrees. So how much does the temperature vary? Well, it varies by up to 300 degrees. The difference between those two amounts is 300 degrees. So think about it on a number line. There's 0. We have 127 here. We have negative 173 here. So the distance from there to there is 300. That's what that is telling us. So check out our guided practice below. We have 5, 6 problems for tomorrow. Finish those up and we'll talk about it.